Shut up and sit down.
Welcome to the Bricks King podcast, where I'm going to bed your ear about Lego, review those amazing bricks of plastic, and discuss what is new and up and coming around the Lego world. I'm your Minifigure host, Matt. Let's build on it. Welcome in, everybody. How are we doing today? A lovely episode here for you today. Lego Masters, we are coming down the pipe to the end here. Today we are going over Season 3, Episode number 11. This is going to be a quick one. And it's super duper important for one major reason, because it has to do with racing and a racing legend, of course. Anyway, so as I teased on the last Lego Masters episode, this is about it's an electric go-kart that they're using here. And the teams are basically having to skin a go-kart to look like a race car that one of them is going to drive, and then ultimately they will compete against one another in a quote-unquote race. Now, I got to say, my favorite part of this entire episode was at the beginning. I am a giant NASCAR fan, and Jeff Gordon was my favorite driver ever since I was a kid. Ever since I started watching NASCAR in like 93, he was my guy. The Rainbow Warriors, man. Anyway, so having him open up the show, driving Will around in, I'm assuming it's a Camaro, around Atlanta Motor Speedway was just awesome. It was so awesome. And it was just funny. It was just absolutely hilarious. I watched it multiple times and I laughed harder and harder every time. So if you haven't seen it, you definitely need to go check out just the first few minutes and then turn it off after that. However, when we get to the challenge, they were split up. Mind you, there are 4 teams left. The challenges, they were split into 2 pairs. You had Steven and Steven, and Dave and Emily. You had Nick and Stacy, and Brendan and Greg. So the red team, being the former team that I talked about, including the Stevens, they were up first, and essentially what they were tasked with doing is, again, skinning a car. They created this thing called the Red Rocket. It had some pretty cool decaling on it. Now, if you apparently are from Canada, you say Deckel. At least that's what Emily says, Deckel, which absolutely made me cringe when I heard it. I was like, what'd she say? I've never heard it that way before. So I thought that was kind of funny, but they have a whole bunch of little emblems, logos that are on there and stuff like that. The slick part of the car, man, they really managed to capture the body in a way that I really would not have honestly expected. I was kind of really surprised that they managed to do so well. They also kind of put this little spoiler on the back as well, because the back end of it is kind of more or less open. I get that to a certain degree or whatever, but you also got to remember, like, it's not encasing the entire driver, right? You just got some decals that are on the side, or decals, whatever you want to have. But I definitely like the sloping that they did with this. It's super difficult in this scale. I shouldn't say super difficult. It's just much more difficult in a scale to do something like this than it is smaller, because it takes a lot more step downs, a lot more bricks in this spot, to be able to get that angle to the front, to the sides, and everything like that. Now, the other thing that is included here, they have to not just make it look pretty, it has to be functional. You are still talking about weight. You are still talking about winning. You are still talking about having to compete. And the interesting thing here is Emily is a super small person in comparison to the rest of the people on the show. I think she's 99% sure she is smaller than Stacy as well. But the funny thing behind this is the rigidity has to be there for this. You have to have that there. So I'll let you know how it works here in a moment. We'll get to that. So the red team's car, it really looks nice. The judges had some good compliments. The only thing that I don't want to say that it was negative, but the only thing criticism-wise, Jamie had mentioned, a little concern of the beefiness in the rear, or I suppose lack thereof. So the blue team's car is called Electric Blue. This is a different take. This almost feels very Formula-esque, coming kind of like a Formula One type car or open-wheeled car. You've got this giant rear decking of a spoiler that is on the rear wing, not even a spoiler, but the rear wing looks very IndyCar-esque, very Formula One-esque to a certain degree. There's lightning bolts that are on here. You've got the 90 that's on there. I'm assuming that's the 90 years of play for Lego, and thus the reason their car is number 90. Some interesting little things, they mentioned they're all, 90s kids and stuff like that. So the decor, the exterior looks more similar with that than it does really anything else. So cool stuff. Now, one of the things Jeff Gordon had mentioned, he really liked the car sitting still because it just looked super fast in the way that it was done. And it does. Other thing that he had mentioned is he would have liked to see more of a sharper angle at the front because it does look a little chunky in the front. Your back end looks fast. Your front doesn't look horribly slow, but it looks a little fatter on the front end. The angle, it almost looks like a front end of a tractor. Now, one of the other things that was important here is having the best designed car as far as the voting goes here. That gives you pole position. So you are starting P1, which is super important in really any racing series. It's always good to be out in front, especially when chaos happens. You don't want to be making your way through it. So let's talk about the race. The great thing is you have Will Arnett, you have Jeff Gordon calling the race, which is absolutely awesome. It's perfect. You have a real driver, and then you have a guy that, I don't know, can he drive? Plus, they also have to do a pit stop in here as well. Their crew, they have to change. I think it's one tire here that they had to change. And so it was this really cool dichotomy of not just building, but building really well. And then also having that, well, I've really got to have something fast and I've really got to rely on my crew to be able to win. So let's go ahead and jump a little bit forward. We'll fast forward here and tell you about the race and then wrap this thing up. So the race is comprised of having to do 10 laps. They have to do their quote unquote pit stop. They don't actually change a tire. They have to take a brick built tire, basically reskin it in their color. Once it's done, boom, they're done. And then they can leave pit lane again and then continue on with the race. Emily led until the pit stop, then was overtaken due to a slow pit stop by her team. Again, it feels so weird to call it a pit stop because it really wasn't a pit stop. Anyway, Blue got out in front and ended up going to the victory lane, and that was really kind of neat. And then here's what I love. Okay. By now, assuming you've watched it, but by now, if you've watched it, you already know no one is going home. And when I'd found out days prior to the episode that, hey, no one is going home. Okay, no one's going home. You made a challenge where you paired two teams together for each side. Of course they're not going home. How would you decide who goes home? Because they all work together on the same project. It's not like the driver was a lesser person than the person skinning the tire or the people helping build the car together. All four of them wasn't really a thing. Well, I think it was all three. But regardless, it didn't make any sense. So people watching it, I'm sure those of you that watch it were probably looking at it like, excuse me, what? That makes absolutely zero sense. However, so nobody did go home. The build was pretty neat. And yeah, there wasn't a whole lot else to this. Well, I guess we can wrap it up now, right? And with a pretty little bow. Actually, no. Here's what we're doing. We are rolling in the episode that is the last challenge before the finale challenge. In this case, there is a team going home. There are 4 teams left. One of them has to go home. The episode is called Waterworks. What they have to do is they have to create a fountain, a Lego brick-built fountain that actually has water rolling through it to display for the judges. It's got to have some functionality to it and everything like that. And first up We're going to go Steven and Steven here. Theirs is called The Duckies After the Rain, and it is exquisite. Such an impressive build in its own right. The coloring of this thing is fantastic. You've got this giant brick built rainbow with clouds, the sun, but the paneling that goes all along the base of this thing. So you have your rainbow arch, and then you have some ducks, and you have somebody that's, chilling by the water with the ducks. And then you have all your greenery around this like little pond that they have, and the flowers of different colors, the pinks, the oranges, the reds. You've got splashes of purple and yellow in here on the sides, and there's just so much. And then you have this beautiful stand as well. But man, I really like the way this is done. So as far as the build goes, it's not something that you really look at as like, oh my God, this is super awesome. But it really kind of is. And the great thing about it is their ducks actually rotate in a circle. There's 4 or 5 of them. It's fantastic. The sun does spin, which, you can take it or leave it. Some people are going to be like, well, that's stupid. I don't really understand that. But then the water is cascading down. It's just so pretty in the way that it is done. I mean, they really did a phenomenal job managing their water and how they're going to use it and what it should look like. And one of the things that they had mentioned is the water that is coming down, like the base, the stanchion that is holding this thing up, it looks like a raining effect, and it absolutely does. It's just phenomenal. So Brennan and Greg are up next here, and they chose to go with something called Tulips in the Spring. They have this beautiful windmill that they have built. It's mainly red and yellow sheeting on the outside, and then their actual the propeller on the front actually is really rather large. And what it is doing is it is capturing a basically the width of a hose water that is coming out the top of this thing. And it is just slowly trickling that water down. It's hitting I guess what you could say is like a little pump, like if you were to have like a well pump in the ground, and then it's filling this kind of little bucket that is going on, and then the bucket tips and then sets back upright. Their idea behind this is like a summer shower, that you get a thunderstorm that happens, you get that nice pretty rain and stuff like that, and that smell when it hits the pavement. Oh God, it smells intoxicating. Now, one thing to mention about this, and I totally forgot to mention it straight out of the gate with their build. There are tulips that are on the ground. And the idea behind this is the water, there's another function with this, and it's supposed to be able to, their tulips are supposed to pop up. And they said they're not able to because there's too much friction at this point. So that is definitely something that Jamie had mentioned, that, they went very ambitious, and, the rest of their stuff is very flat. Like I had mentioned, they have these flat sides. They have the flat front, the propeller that's in the front, not a propeller, but anyway, it is flat in the front as well. However, the fact that they have 2 water functions, one of them being tipping the bucket with the spigot that's coming up out of the well, out of the ground. And then also the fact that their windmill, the blade actually, that's what I was looking for, blade. The blade actually rotates based on water. There is no motor that is turning that. It is simply based on fluid dynamics. Is that? I think it's fluid dynamics. Fluidics. It is only rotating in that way because of the water that is constantly adding force to it. So I really like that. It's a bummer that their tulips did not come up, because that is definitely something, when you're down this far into a contest show, these are the things that can cause you all kinds of problems. So let's check out what the other 2 have. Now, I got to say, so Nick and Stacy are up here next, and I've got to say, this build was way, way unique. This is everything that you would want for like as a kid at the beach. You want to build your little sandcastle and all that kind of stuff and just have a blast with it. It's called Crabbing Around. And you have this big giant sandcastle. So that tan color, just very kind of, very drab, very not super pretty, but then you have this bright orange starfish that they have in the front. You've got some seaweed that is kind of entangled around this because you got to use seaweed in a sandcastle. You have to. And then you have some crabs. You've got some different crabs all over the build. I think there's 3 or 4 of them, at least that we can see. And then they have their water function as well, which I'll talk about here in a second. In the very rear of this thing, they have a white flag that swings. Basically, like Nick had mentioned, to keep the sea from coming in and saying, hey, don't destroy our sandcastle, because we all know what that's like, right? You build it, you leave the beach, you come back the next day, it's totally gone. Anyway, so the first water function that they have is the water that is coming down out the front of this thing. Think of it as like this kind of spigot that, Brennan and Greg had that was coming up out of the ground, except this one is like a diving board for water coming out the front of the castle. And it drops down, it spins a pinwheel colored wheel like you would see on like on a flour mill, something like that, something you would see in the water for the water to turn the mill and stuff like that. So they have that. And then also what they have in the, I guess, center rear, not completely in the rear, but they have another function in here that was using kind of like another pinwheel type function. And what that is doing is they have it built almost in a way where it kind of catches water, like just using the interior part of the Lego brick. And what that is doing is that is spinning through some gears, and that is moving the flag back and forth, the surrender flag. So that is a very unique way in its own right. Oh, the last thing that I forgot. In the very front, their pinwheel moves their crab that is on the bottom. All that is connected together. And the one thing that I thought was really cool is Amy had mentioned, it really tells a story, and it does. This is exactly what you want at this point in time in a competition. And it sells it. It does a really good job. And I love, like she said, the story. Every little kid that has gone to a beach knows exactly what this is like and knows this feeling. So it's always a good thing to tap into nostalgia. So Dave and Emily are up next, and their fountain, which is sharp as can be, is called Flamingo with the Flow. They're the ones that are doing these silly pun names because they're so punny. Yeah, I just did that. Anyway, they have this giant flamingo that is standing up out of the water. There's so much as far as just extra design that is going on kind of around the base of this thing. You've got these giant, thick stalk of legs, that's how the water's being siphoned up through. But down on the bottom, you've got these flowers and stuff. You've got their bees and stuff that they have that are visiting the flowers, which is always, important for pollination and growing things, right? So as far as their water feature goes, it is a very unique one. So the idea behind this and the bees and such, the bees are there doing the flowers, right? Just like this guy is traipsing through the flowers and stuff. And what is going on is the water is coming up out the top, and his head is tilted back. His beak is open, and the water comes out. And what happens is down below, as the water is falling, it is turning these clusters of bees on their gearing mechanisms, and they're spinning faster and faster and faster the more water that comes out. And so telling the story behind this is, you irritate bees, they get more angrier and they start spinning in, well, not really spinning, but you know what it's like. If you agitate a hive or a nest or anything like that, they start getting hyped up and you better run. So he's spitting water out of his mouth to get rid of these bees away from him. In turn, it's actually aggravating them even more. And the only thing that happened that was negative, I should say, is the fact that the leg, I originally, when I put in my notes here, the leg, and I had to go back and watch it again. They do have thick stalk legs, but the one that was kind of standing up, how flamingos kind of have that one that they hold up in the air sometimes, not all the time. That almost kind of what it looked like. Anyway, so part of that fell off, but their bird is just absolutely incredible. Now, Jamie did mention the stalks for the flowers that are on the sides. He wished those would have been a little thinner or been able to be hidden a different way. And I agree. They absolutely could have done that. It could have been slightly better, I guess might be the word. But, it's really not that big of a deal in comparison. So you've got 4 pretty darn good builds. It's going to be tough for the judges to really choose one and say, you're going home. So let's go ahead and dive into that. So let's talk about who is going home. No, not just yet. So the top 2 for this challenge were Nick and Stacy and Steven and Steven. And I'm not shocked at all. Both of those builds were really, really well done. Nick and Stacy's was a really cute build. And, again, nostalgia factor there that captures a lot. Maybe not for Amy and Jamie, but most definitely it is an important part in this. Absolutely. So those 2 at least go on to the final, those 2 teams. Then we have Dave and Emily. Obviously, the bottom 2, Dave and Emily and Brendan and Greg. Dave and Emily are there because of their leg falling off, not the best thing. And then Brendan and Greg having, technical difficulties, and then some of the aesthetic on the outside, as Jamie had mentioned before, with it kind of being, kind of drab and bland. So unfortunately, they are the team that goes home. So very disappointing. Definitely a team that showed a lot of potential pretty much the whole way through. Very solid as a whole. And it's sad to see them go. So that's going to wrap this one up. There is still the finale that is left, and we will discuss it. We will run through it. We will give you your champion. And then obviously on the back side of that, we will have the interviews with the remaining teams that are either left or have gone home or are going home. Everybody will be going home after the finale, obviously. So until we meet again, I'm your minifig host, Matt. Let's build on it.